We're here to talk about BioGraffs today. I'm here with Joey Salvatore, who's worked with me on BioGraffs for a long time. Has been an invaluable partner and advisor, and he's a therapist.
I work with a lot of different clients, but my specific, niche is around gender nonconforming people, trans people, LGBTQIA plus people, and I really do what I can to promote clients feeling more engaged in their life and connecting with the stories that feel most valuable about who they are. And BioGraffs gives me a great invitation to kind of concretely plant them into the stories that we shape, that shape our lives.
Okay, so we'll get started, and we're just going to talk about the sort of the three-step process of BioGraffs, where you're thinking of the story and what are the parts of the story, you're building your BioGraff, and then you're talking about it. So let's get started.
I want to start just by inviting people to understand that language is a great doorway, right, to understanding people, but it has a lot of assumptions attached to it. So I might start there, right? Like when I say I'm feeling depressed, that might mean something very different than when you say you're feeling depressed. So,
right. So what is depression? What do you mean by that? What are the parts of it? How do these parts interact with each other? Where are the contradictions in your depression? Like, so this, you're saying that this could be something that someone can make a BioGraff in a sort of an introductory way. Here's what depression looks like to me. Here's how my experience of depression is. Here's how I feel depression in my body. Here's what triggers my depression. All those things could be an individual, could be a BioGraff about this one thing.
Yeah, and you just gave me like 5 different, kind of ways to look at this, right? So especially, in this 20-minute intro that I might be sharing with a client, I'm getting a lot of great information about how they see the world and the stories that they share with themselves and with others about their experiences, right? So, so I'll go ahead and speak on myself. I have my own, mental health wonders in my day-to-day. And so if I think about depression for myself, for me, it's really heady, right? Mm-hmm. It's a lot of negative thought content.
For me as well.
Like noticing, oh, what's the point kind of thoughts, or I feel so sad today, I don't want to get out of bed kind of thoughts. And so for me, as I might invite someone into what depression looks like, it might have a lot of like noticing thought content. But for others, it might go like, wow, my body is so sore. Right. And using maybe different, in this case, BioGraffs markers or different cubes to indicate when I say I'm depressed, what I'm actually talking about is how tired my body is, how sore my back is. Or when someone else says they're depressed, right, it might mean kind of another catch-all. So it helps me kind of picture the story that they're picking off the shelf. Just by inviting, like, let's talk about what you mean when you say this one word.
It's one word. Yes. Right. Right. Yeah. So, and you could kind of put into, take that word depression and replace it with anxiety, or the state of my relationship, or, how I feel about my friend, or who I am as a parent, or my feeling of inadequacies in my job, sort of anything can go in that blank of depression, and it sort of follows the same sequence of the progression of the activity when you're doing a BioGraff. So the first is like, how do I experience my blank? Let's say depression, just for example, right? And then, so the first step is to think of what are the parts, just as you were saying, what are the parts, the feeling in my body, or the dark thoughts I have, or I respond in this way, or here's the kind of things that I say, or whatever the things are that are part of this experience, is to just sort of start listing them in a way.
And this, as you're saying this, right, this isn't maybe an intuitive step for some people, right? I'm a therapist. I am kind of in the business of conversation, and using language to kind of deepen and dive into someone, they might not know that what we're doing when we start that session is figuring out the title, right? What's the title of the conversation? It's kind of in essence what starting a BioGraff is like. Tell me about your week is a really common, opener for therapy. But sometimes I might ask something like, how has that depression been impacting how tired your body has been this week? If I know that's what some of their experience is, right? So I might build on that week after week. Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, you started by saying how sore your back was. Maybe today we can start to talk about how that sore back got in your way. What was the cost of that this week? That's me providing them a title, a container, right, for where to put their attention, where to focus on. In essence, what we're doing is creating, the moving parts of BioGraffs in conversation.
Yes.
Right. So we might start to kind of, take something that feels really unwieldy.
Yeah. Yes. Like, how do I tell you about my week? Because there was this, and then there was this, and then this happened, and this, and that made me feel. And these were, these were like a contradiction. And I don't want to focus too much on this because I don't want you to miss this big part. So this is a way to take sort of all the parts and bring them together into one story, one frame.
Yeah, just a nice, meaningful frame so that we both know what is it that we're focusing on together. I think in that therapy is always ever changing, right? The client's needs change week by week. I'm changing in the room with them. I also want to make sure I know what are the important details for me to hold on to in this for a client. If they have so much to explore that they might be moving so fast, I might miss things, they might miss things. And then later, there could even be hurt feelings about that. That was so important to me. Why don't you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Like,
yeah.
If only I had some kind of tool where I can go. Yes, the green cube.
Don't forget the green. That's an important part. Yeah.
The visual supports help me a little bit remember the story, right? So it could be helpful for me on the therapist side as much as it could be helpful
because you see what the whole story is and all the parts of it. Yeah. So if you think of making a BioGraff as kind of a 3-phase thing. So there's the creating the title and thinking about the parts, and that's where you're assigning, the cube colors to various things, which is what we just talked about. That part. The next part is making the BioGraff. Once you've figured out what the parts, then you're constructing the story, the visual story out of the cubes. And then the third part is when we now with our therapist or with our partner or with our coach or whatever the two people are, now we share that BioGraff and we talk about what that story is. So let's talk for a minute about the next phase, which is the making of it, and how I think that people, when they start manipulating these parts of their story into this image, using the cubes to mean things, they naturally reach for spatial metaphors to add more meaning and expression. And so they're manipulating the cubes, and they're thinking about, okay, how does this one part of my story relate to this other part of the story, and how can I show that in the way that the cubes are placed. So actually, I could show you one I've made recently.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So now I made this, and you see how there's the yellow and it goes all around, and so that's a spatial metaphor, and this means affection, and this is about my relationship with a particular person. And so I made it go all around the whole graph because my affection for this person seems to encompass the whole thing and as a container. So those are all kind of spatial metaphors that I expressed in just the way I laid the cubes out. And I think I think people don't have to think that hard because they're so embedded in our language that people automatically go for those, a metaphor like, my friendship, is like a blanket. My friendship, it contains me, or it, it protects me, or it is in some way encircling me, my life, or, those are all spatial metaphors, and people express them with the cubes. It takes a small amount of cueing the person, I think, to get them to see that and to start doing it. And I think, and one of the ways that will happen in the context of therapy is you'll show them, some of the samples that there are, and you'll point out, see how these cubes, underlie these other cubes, so that might have meaning. So you give people a little cue like that, that those spatial metaphors are available to them, and they'll just naturally use them. They'll build walls. Here's a wall, of things, or this blue and purple. One of these is my needs and your needs, and I felt like I have so many more needs, and my needs are smothering your needs. You have very few needs, just one purple. It's not about you, it's about someone else. So I expressed how I felt, how my needs related to their needs.
Oh, yeah, thank you for your willingness to share, because I on this side, I get a lot of information in one snapshot, right? So you're right, I can see a lot of information around feelings that are coming up. I can see information around quantity, right? Like how much mine compared to yours, and all of those can be their own kind of conversation we can draw out together. So I might even, kind of to bring it where we were before, this might have started somewhere like, hey, Jen, welcome back to session. I know we've spent some time talking together around what's going on with that, particular one relationship, whatever we were discussing. And I've noticed that, yeah, there's been a lot of different feelings and thoughts around it. I wonder if you might just tell me a little bit about what it's going, what your feelings are around it in this moment. Maybe even, build a biograph around it with me, right? So something as, a title here, right? From a therapist's perspective, here I'm providing a framework, like, tell me about how your relationship's been this week. And we're taking that invitation and then providing a visual representation of it. And right, and that gives me so much more specific data than something like my relationship's going fine.
Right.
Things are like they were last week. I don't know what that means, right? Like I can interpret, but now I get a lot of information. Like this week, wow, there's still that circle of affection, and you're feeling that right now. Yeah, so that sounds really supportive for you. I imagine that's something that really continues to keep you, connected to this person, or whatever would be there.
Yeah.
So I thank you for showing, a glimpse of that, so I can kind of hear how I would respond to it clinically, and maybe what my role would be.
Yeah. So that brings us to the part 3, which is the talking about the BioGraff once the person has made it. So a lot of that talking can happen in the process of making it, where a lot of times people will, because they're in a session with their therapist, they feel like they should talk. So as they're making it, they often talk through what they're doing. Well, then I guess I would make a cube stand for this, and and so they'll sort of narrate what they're doing as they're doing it. So that's giving you a lot of information in the process of doing the activity before you even get to the talking point. There's back and forth where they're, or maybe if they're stuck, you might suggest, well, isn't there something about your body you're feeling when you're depressed? And they go, oh yeah, I'll add that, so that you're giving them cues of things to make the cube stand for, and as they're laying it out, if you're saying, well, is that, I see you're putting it under this other thing. So there can be sort of a little bit of back and forth while it's happening, but then once it's created, it becomes a platform it's kind of like a visual talking stick. It's like, okay, I have this thing, now I'm going to tell you the story, and I'm going to tell you what each cube means, and I'm going to tell you why I placed it the way I did. And I'm going to walk you through the entire image, just like it's like I'm telling you a story. I'm going to explain the graph. So that's kind of, it becomes a storytelling thing. And then you're going to listen, and then you're going to have either you're going to have questions or you're going to have comments.
Right.
You're going to go, so what do you mean? What does this cube mean? I'm not sure what you mean by, you just put, because we ask people to put just, as few words as possible to describe each thing, I put, like, for instance, here, this one is shame. But I don't say what the shame is on my BioGraff. It's just when I tell it to you, I explain what I meant by shame, what that shame is about, what that feeling is. And so I say more about what each of these things mean. So that's part of the process too, explain what the green cubes mean, explain what the orange cubes mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's again, I think a unique space and invitation for me, because I get to see what you're applying value to, right? What you're connecting meaning to as you're telling a story. Right now, I know that we're looking out for shame, we're looking out for strokes of affection, right? And maybe the relationship between those pieces, right? It informs some of my treatment objectives when I get to have some of these visual supports and invitations from people and how they're shaping the story. It's in some ways, and I know you and I've talked about this in the past, right? Like, there's a bit of a narrative work that we get engaged in, and in essence, the story has a lot of moving parts, right? And there's almost like a director in our mind, right? And that they call the shots, they call kind of where the camera puts its focus and what we notice in a scene and what we don't notice. But if we're open to be curious about it, we might even start like taking notes, right? And kind of screenplay edits a little bit here. Like, maybe I don't want to focus on that detail as much. Maybe I missed something in that scene that wasn't there, but that was there that I wasn't focusing on, right? So
yeah,
it can be transformative to hear how something like, how I feel about my body, something like this can maybe start with shame, 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 right? Lots of cubes surrounding, this is how I feel about my body, to maybe seeing what informs that shame. Actually something that isn't mine, that's a societal image or some kind of
and that's such a great example, because then you can really see how you might suggest how would it feel to peel some of that shame away. And so they can have that experiential moment of connecting to that shame by touching the cubes and then moving them away from there, and maybe adding, if the center is, an affection for the body and it's surrounded by shame, what would it feel like to add more of that positive feeling and peel some of that shame away? So you could have that sort of experiential moment interacting with those feelings and those meanings.
Well, and you're creating more meaningful, concrete memories, like by immersing yourself in creating a BioGraff, telling a story with your whole body, with someone else. You're inviting more processes of yourself to be present in that moment. So you're gonna, honestly, you're probably gonna remember that experience in a way that's different than if you just shared it with someone in passing.
That's a great point. Yeah.
So I guess another way to put that would be, we almost provide like automatic stories sometimes without realizing, how was my day? Fine? Was it? Or did I just throw that out because that's such a script that we're so accustomed to? And for people with wounds, with trauma, with, experiences of depression, anxiety, these other pieces, some of those stories become automatic. How I feel about my body, ashamed. How I feel about my body used to be ashamed, and now it's not. Slow it down with someone and to see that there's more to it is actually part of the work. And so you're providing another, demonstration, another tool that slows that down, so we get to see the power of our own storytelling, right?
Yes, that's fantastic. I think that element of it that is the slowing down is so important, that it's not, just relating your day. It's really slowing down, thinking about what are the parts of it, what really happened, how do you're focusing. It brings your focus down to a a very specific story that you want to do, and slows you down to think about it.
And I guess just to refer back to that kind of like director of the mind metaphor, right? Like we're creating scenes there, and we get to kind of look back at them sometimes. Like this happens a lot whenever I'm engaged in therapy, especially if you have an enduring relationship with someone. And I really do a lot of relationship building in my work. I think that's something that's really important to foster trust. So say I'm a year in to the work and I know that body image, I'm going to keep that example going. I know that body image is something that this client was once really ashamed about, but I start to see glimmers of change in how they talk about themselves. Maybe they're telling me more moments of feeling sexy or proud or, powerful in who they are. I might drop them into that moment. Hey, tell me about your body. How are you feeling about it today? Right? What a great opportunity to make a biograph that says, this is me now, July 15th. That's me then, right? Wow, look how these images have shifted.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's like a way to really see progress, literally see progress.
Mm-hmm. And I think therapists, we're looking for a lot of, we want data, we want pre-test measures, we want post-test measures, but maybe we don't want to get bogged down in like the data collection of it all, right? Like we get important feedback on how clients are improving just by talking. Oh, I'm feeling better than I was last summer. Cool, right?
Yeah.
But BioGraffs can provide another support for that. Like now we have a little bit of evidence to ground this in. There's an image that says things are looking differently now, right? There's a lot of moving parts in the room at all times. So this just kind of gets us to focus on what's there.
Yeah. It's another tool for that same goal. Yes. So one thing about the talking about the BioGraff that we haven't quite mentioned yet, and then we'll wrap up this, is that people make these things and these BioGraffs, and then you look at it and they tell you about in their story, and you might see things that they didn't know that they were doing, or they didn't mention, they didn't really notice that, oh, they forgot to put that orange cube in. And what does it mean that they left it out? That happens a lot. There'll be something, in the legend, and then it doesn't show up in the BioGraff. And so that would be a thing to talk about. Why did you leave that out? Or other things, why did you put these cubes, down below these other cubes? Does that have meaning for you? Or this cube seems to be very separate. It's way over here by itself. What does that mean for you? And maybe they didn't think to talk about that when they were explaining your BioGraff, or maybe they didn't even see that they were doing that. So that's something that in the process of talking about it and looking at it, you bring other perspectives and point out things that they might not have seen.
I think that's a terrific point. And, it almost speaks to one of the reasons people go to therapy, one of the magics of therapy, right? So just to ground this and maybe some clinical language, I'm thinking about Clara Hill's Helping Skills, which is a really common counseling textbook that many students learn about their practice. And there's 3 stages to having conversation with someone in therapy, and they're all meaningful in different ways. One is exploration, right? That's kind of where we were before. Tell me about how depression looks for you, right? So that might look like this. Another one is what you're saying, right? Raising insight. Another job for us is to be curious and see things that are being overlooked, or to see things from a different perspective, right, than our clients would. So you're right. I think BioGraffs is a lot of opportunities for, oh, you're going through the door. Did you notice the window? Right. And BioGraffs has opportunities to make observations about color. why is it yellow? Oh, interesting. I'm noticing how black it is, right? Observations I can raise about frequency. I'm noticing there's a lot more of these than those. Did you do that on purpose? Right? I can make observations about distance between cubes. Wow, I'm noticing there's a lot of room between you and that other person. That sounds like, is that happening in your relationship all the time? Right? Like whatever the N is, right?
Yeah.
Now I have a lot of different ways to move the insight to raise awareness for someone and to see if they like that or if they want to change it. Right. So you're exactly right. I think all that data is right there in front of me when I see a graph.
Yeah. Yeah. Joey, I love to hear you talk about BioGraffs because you so get it, and it gives me such another perspective on it. And you really say it all so well. So thank you for that first. So I just want to kind of recap that it's a 3-phase process. There's one is like deciding on the story and figuring out what the parts of the story is. And that can be that's a very interactive process between a therapist or other helper and the client. What's the story going to be about? What are the parts of the story? Then the next phase is when they're building a BioGraff, where they're using a lot of these spatial metaphors, and they're using, there's different ways that they can build it that would say different things. It can be like a timeline if it's, a progress, what's a day like in your depression? So it's like a timeline of the day, or it's like, what is your depression like? And it might be more like a mosaic. So or you could do like, what are you like when you're not depressed versus what are you like when you're depressed? And it could be like this comparison thing. So there's different ways to build it that could say different things. And that's also a really interactive process of coming up with the visual. And then the third phase is the talking about it once it's done. And that's also really interactive with just, you asking questions and that back and forth and interpretations, and you're bringing your own interpretations, and then you're inviting them to move things around to get that experiential aspect of it.
Yeah.
And that's a 50-minute, that takes 50 minutes.
Say that could be multiple sessions right there, right? Like all of this is such rich work, and so we get to move at a pace that feels reasonable for both of us, right? We in the way that BioGraffs is the talking stick, right? That we get to observe it together, and these 3 phases can unfold naturally as the relationship builds, and we get to revisit them together as our work builds too. So it's a great tool. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Joey. It was great talking to you, and I'm really looking forward to doing this again and in more depth, maybe to specific issues. We could talk about it another time, and so keep your eye on this space for more conversations between me and Joey about BioGraffs.
Thank you.